All right. So, let's see. Tonight, where am I since I last left you? I've mostly been focused now on the exhaust bowls and trying to kind of get a bulk of that done. As you can see, I have done a bit of polishing, which is still decently, there's a lot of cavitation, but it's still somehow like a nice mirror finish. It is very addictive. Before I get into that, I just wanted to say that. Just seeing polished mirror finish on metal is very satisfying, but I had to take a day off because I just felt like crap yesterday, and I have problems with my neck that go out of whack and like affect all sorts of things, and if I forget to adjust my neck and pop it back into place, the symptoms can mimic other things. At the same time, and of course I don't have it out here, but I just, before I got into this, I wanted to make a note about, wearing respirators and being safe. And it's not to say that iron is necessarily toxic, even though at the same time iron oxide can be, and as soon as iron is, in contact with the wetness of your body, it turns into iron oxide, potentially. I did a good 3 hours the day before. I would say just starting to clean this chamber up and polish it was a good, probably an hour and a half. But, so whether, I wear a P100 respirator, so possibly I don't know, maybe it's my face and it doesn't always seal. That's why I always try to be clean shaven, because even any stubble on your face to break that seal, those fine powders, because there's a lot more going on than these little iron filings. And I want to say iron dust or any metal dust it's supposedly around 50 microns, and a P100, a filter like that blocks 0.3 or 0.5 microns, I went to say, so it should be blocking it all, but again, the very, very fine particles, and, in a scenario like this, I don't have a fume extractor, and I'm working mostly in the garage. I usually will, open the door at least to keep air coming in, but usually when I would encounter that feeling of, it's not metal fume fever, it's not that extreme, but you kind of feel this malaise or sickness. Again, for me, sometimes it's my neck, and when I'm leaned over, how the camera is, this is actually, I do this all stand up. I don't know if that was obvious or not, but I built this bench about a year ago, and I deliberately made it it's above my waistline, so this is a very comfortable bench to work on all sorts of things, whether it's machining, or stuff like this, or even arts and crafts. It would be nice to get a stool for it, but I deliberately made it on the high side so I could do this standing up. And I think last time I was porting I had a sit down setup, and that was actually really comfortable. But then I would always have a fan on because my face was closer to the work. The other thing was I wasn't wearing safety goggles, because it really can cloud the sharpness of your vision, and not just because of fogging, but see the difference? You can mostly see what you're doing. But the reason why I think that's also important, and again, not that it's necessarily toxic, but You know when you like wake up, I've had this happen multiple times if I'm not protecting my eyes, but you know when like you first wake up, you can kind of see the reflection of what's going on in your eye. Like I have floaters as well, so if you have floaters, maybe that's like a good way to explain it, but when I'm just waking up, I can usually see actual. They basically look like just a bunch of horizontal lines, and that's how you can tell they're actual little teeny iron shavings, like smaller than that. And I've looked up like how iron molecules are bound, and it's very similar. So I just rinsed my eyes out, and I think that kind of took care of it. But even something like that on your body, in contact with your bloodstream or anything, could just make you feel like ill, and that's kind of what was going on yesterday. And with my neck, I had trouble breathing, so luckily today I feel fine. I got more sleep. I did some internal ceramic coating on my headers, so those are stainless steel. There's actually a video on that. That Eastwood stuff though, like that was a total mess, but in the end, like it still did the job. Like I was still thankful, and anything that gets on the outside of shiny stainless steel with like some rubbing alcohol and elbow grease and a little thumb scratching definitely came off. But the point is, you know, just use your respirator, like be smart. I don't like to make videos like promoting something if I know someone's like, oh, well, why didn't you tell me this? And don't get me wrong, there's probably pros. Like, I don't understand how a lot of people do things that they do, right? Like, I worked in a foundry as security, actually, or this big manufacturing plant. They had an iron foundry, aluminum. It was basically the scariest place in the world to do tours on third shift. Like, especially in this one area, like there was a guy that got killed in a machine, and there's like ghost stories of this place if you are into that kind of thing. But they did like their own plastic work, like machining, and you'd get those guys there that would just have like a bandana on their head, and they were like, you know, the lifers, like 30 years they've been in this plant. And I don't know how they do it. Maybe they all inevitably have COPD. I have sensitivities breathing. Like if I go near a campfire, I don't think I'm asthmatic, but like if I have exposure to smoke, it just, I don't know, maybe I'm more sensitive than other people because I don't smoke or drink, so anything like that I just have a low tolerance for. So like I was fine. I'll also do things like a couple of remedies that are good for metals. Like you may have heard of like welders drinking milk. Like I have tried that with days that I'm welding. I'll eat like a bunch of yogurt. Supposedly the molecules can kind of like chelate naturally, like any metal molecules in your body, like especially heavy metals. And also like I eat a lot of raw garlic for more than one reason. But the other point, and I'll get right back to the porting, but I just wanted to I had a few opinions and comments on that because it's part of doing this, and if you're gonna do it, is like I said, being smart. And chances are if you're porting, you're already in that world of automotive, but you may be someone that's brand new and you're not aware. And the reality is there's people that do get hospitalized, even sometimes worse. You know, like you should look up, I forget the gas, I talked about this in another video, but people that'll clean their welding materials with like bleach and then they go to weld it and it releases like a fatal gas. I mean, bleach is awful to begin with anyway, because it gives off chlorine gas. Like, that's terrible for you. But I'll say, like, I've been using PPE, like, almost occupationally. Like, you know, there's people that use it a lot more than I do, but this is a good 5 years that I've had experience with all types of respirators. what ones work with what, and I've seen some ridiculous stuff. At one of my jobs a few years ago, they had him in like an N95 Cool Flow. This kid, first of all, he had a huge beard, and they had him using like Armor All inside. And the thing with Armor All, you wouldn't really think it's really that like caustic, but it has advisement to use it like with your car doors open. Like it definitely has enough VOCs in it that'll, could inflame your pulmonary system. And that's usually what the problem really is. And if you have breathing trouble to begin with already, it makes you, you might feel faint. Like I do like wood staining, and I'm in contact with all sorts of stuff that I try to avoid. And the thing with this whole project is it's really kind of a one shot deal. I'm not saying I would never do it again in the future, but I'm not a jobber or a career person with like automotive. Arts and crafts are a little bit different. Like I'll never not be doing something like that, but this is like really intense for my normal lifestyle and just something that I wanted to do. And I've come back to automotive stuff like off and on in my life, or at least with like different interests. But so you may already know, and that's completely useless, but the point being is it can still get to you. Even with P100, like that's not like a hazmat suit. And I don't want to like get political or too opinionated on this, but if you are a PPE user, and you are aware of the realities of how things can get to you, then you know why some of us were kind of, I wouldn't say snickering, but kind of like, telling people off who thought that a mask, like in a public restaurant or wherever they were, like during a pandemic, was kind of the end all be all. And it's just ridiculous. Like, for one thing, that's, like I said, I'm not really going to go too far into that, but the problem with it is there's those of us that have had exposure sickness with all sorts of different materials and chemicals and no respirators and no particulate sizes and how they can get to you. And the reality is people put way too much faith in masks that are really not appropriate for what they were using it for, basically. You would read like scientific studies like, oh, the Brownian motion of the COVID particles makes a mask with a larger meshing superior, and it's not true at all. There's a lot of bullshit behind it, and I'm telling you, this is like iron dust that's even larger than that with a P100, and I still knew, like, you can tell when you've worked with metals and things, like, when your body has, and like I said, there's different dietary things you can do, or if you can take a break. Like I feel terrible for people that it is an occupational thing. So anyway, I'm, I did some work today. I did some work before that I hadn't filmed, and I don't even, what did I leave off on? Just like the babbling about probably I think we were on the roof of the intake, or talking more about the reverse swirl fins or whatever. But anyway, so moving on. So exhaust, the major cuts are done on 3 and 4. I'm going to get into the EGR port as well, and why you'll notice that one's a little different than these ones. But here's kind of a pro tip. What I love about this particular rotary, not that it wouldn't work with a collet, but having a drill collar like that, a chuck, I just took, because I only have a little 8-gallon, is that like a hot dog air compressor, and honestly through this whole job I really should have an upright one for the stuff that I've put this poor thing through. But there are things that are completely invaluable, like for restoration, like your needle scaler, air chisel. There are things that in short bursts work well. There are other things that overheat that thing, like actually the stock switch melted off, and you can kind of see that shiny thing. There's a jump scare, but it melted the factory plastic switch, so I just got like an old school metal one, and it takes heat all day. So anyway, whoops, I'm stepping on it. So I just took that right out of my air angle grinder, and the RPMs that this thing cranks out with that thing is amazing. Like, without any other instrument, this alone, like these, I don't know what the grid is, but it's a Rolock, so just a Rolock thread, and I still have a bunch of these in my toolbox, and there's like green, red, and tan, like finer and coarser, but they all realistically are fine and coarse enough to make metal look like that. Like, that's a mirror finish, even on the actual head surface. So, but my point is that rough factory casting from the negative space of sand, that mostly will turn into that with that. What else? From there, I do use stones, and this just came. This was like $17 on Amazon. That'll be more than enough to finish this job, because just keep in mind, like, the stone, it's like entropy. It does take a while to wear them down, but they'll kind of glass up on you as well. But just keep in mind, like, obviously the stone, it's like sandpaper, so the stone, like, not like a metal burr, like the stone is going away. I do have really fine, like, Dremel, like those ones. I think like 650, a 250 and a 650. These work, but if you have the cheap ones, like, the grit just wears out. So stones are basically the way to go. I just got bored, and I was kind of sick of being in my routine, and I came out, I was like, oh, I'm going to try to shine up the port and kind of get me more motivated to finish this, because it looks nice. But you can see there's a lot of cavitation still. I don't know, like, how far down I want to take it before I'm losing, like, too much in the combustion chamber, but at the same time, you know, a build like that, like, if it was still going to be forced induction, like, I really wouldn't care, but I don't know, you could probably remedy that just by running a thinner head gasket if you're really concerned. Like this engine's barely 9-to-1 compression, so I don't know. So it is something to consider, but I don't think it takes so much off. But obviously, if there's still little cavities, like, that'll still give, you know, potential for carbon buildup. But anyway, so that's what I was up to, at least on this particular one. I did start to kind of blend and on the scavenge plateaus a little bit. I don't know if I'm going to go as far as using, like, because I only have one of them, but, like, felt and oil and stuff like that is outside of maybe taking it down a little more to get rid of some of the bumps. Like, that is fine. So it is what it is. Looks good so far. So anyway, moving into the exhaust bowls, let's see where to start. So again, this is a 178 and a 146 stock valve E7. So I didn't want to go too insane. The exhaust port is mostly going to be staying, it's basically the stock size, like, you barely even open it up to the exhaust manifold gasket. Like, it's barely as large as the original gasket, which I'm not going to talk about today. I'm just talking about the bowl. But alright, so where to start? We don't have a stock one to show, really. So basically what I started with is you have like pockets on the inboard wall, like the ridge that's originally here, that gets blended away. I haven't totally finished the short sides on these, but I did so far cut the sharp ridge away, and then there's one on the back as well. The first thing I did and focused on was taking the big egg. So, and again, like the whole point of this video journal or series is to kind of my particular budget, me finding a workaround. You may buy better extended ones. These are like $22 each, so if you could get away with just a long egg, which basically I have been and am, and then I work everything else with my 1/8 inch, it works. And in a cut like this on the outboard wall, like this is the perfect size and shape. Also, what I've did for the valve guide, which you can kind of see, is I've decided to go with kind of a fin, which, I don't know, the camera's not... I'll flip the heads over too in a minute, but... So that was just kind of my idea. I don't know, last time I took them all out completely. Where are they? You're not going to be able to see. So those are the first heads that I did, and I'm not using like guides in there, so I figured it might be smart to keep those a little stronger. The other thing about valve guides is that they act as like a heat sink. So the less of a valve guide that you have, it's going to go into your valve. Now I'm actually I haven't talked about valves really yet on here, and I will, like maybe I'll do like a valve, probably another, or I already have that on the channel, like valve lapping, but I am running like an undercut stainless steel valve, so they're lighter and they are better with heat. So maybe like, I don't know, but I just figured, you know, again, like this time focusing on velocity and stuff, a little more material in there doesn't hurt, and I also figured maybe having this fin isn't a terrible idea to kind of help keep that exhaust on one side or the other, you know. The other thing is, oops, these aren't totally done or blended, but you can see that really nice curve that egg helped make. And what's cool is you have casting lines, at least in this particular head. I mean, maybe all of them you're able to see the buildup on that, like carbon. So I just kind of use that as an eye line. And I haven't mic'd these out. This is kind of a lot of voodoo and guesswork. I am kind of working on cloning my original port because they just looked right, they felt right. If you're looking from the top down, it doesn't really go too far behind the valve seat. But I don't have a measurement yet on how much is actually taken out, but I will get that, like if, you know, someone wanted to just mimic what I'm doing, because I am gonna, again, like do a real-time video. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do it on the first chamber and that I start with, or wait until I really have concrete decisions, because if I did it right now, I'm still kind of trying to get the most succinct way with the least amount of burrs to be able to show. But anyway, so that sharp pocket on the inboard, and these aren't done or blended, but they're mostly done. But you're basically just blending that out. So if you think of this kind of, it's just like the short turn on the intake on this side. Where that dog leg is, that's basically all you're doing, is kind of massaging that open and the short side. But the most important section is that outboard turn. because of how the exhaust comes over this way. You know, this is your quench area, so an exhaust cycle, that's just the majority, the mass of exhaust actually goes out that way. Also, notice on my scavenge plateaus here that look so pretty, they are a little, not that it matters at all, but for some reason when I touched them up again, they got like a little bit of jet. They're a little wobbly, but I may take a stone to that. But I went probably a good extra couple degrees than where I see some people go. So if you use, of course these are all ground down now, but all E7s have that casting mark, or dot. So instead of clocking it before this, that you'll see, like, so that it's even, I just kind of cut it, just not extreme, it's very, very subtle. So kind of like a de-shrouding, right? Just because of the direction, I don't know. Potentially that'll be an even better scavenge plateau than a typical one, but what else? Also, yeah, speaking of de-shrouding, like, these, like, almost don't even need it. But I did a little bit take a stone. Of course, now I can't get it to focus. I have seen it picked up on the intake side in flow bench testing. And again, like, it depends on the valve job on your head, like, you know what I mean? Like, how many miles are on it, where, like, if someone already reworked them. But on the exhaust, when I watched, like, a de-shrouding test, is they actually lost a handful of CFM. Like, even in the low numbers and high numbers and so on. So, not the worst idea, especially de-shrouding probably toward the spark plug, I would assume. And, you know, don't quote me on that. A lot of stuff and thinking, like, even with my original heads, is a lot of it is, like, instinct until I got a decent amount of education on it. But so far as this particular head, the E7's probably the same with, like, E6s and E5s, because they're like the same thing, or same chamber design. Do it on the intake, don't even bother with the exhaust, as long as you, like, you can see. The thing is, like, you're probably going to end up bringing it down a little bit anyway, but it's not like a total de-shroud. Just from this thing, you're not going to hurt anything really with that particular abrasive. But yeah, that's basically it. Just blending it out. I've read different various things on the roof toward the thermactor, like, notice how, like, I kind of biased cuts toward the side, so there's kind of like a gulch there, or ditch. But like I said, opening it up on that turn, the outboard turn, is the most significant. And instinctively, here's the thing, is, like, you're running stock valves, right? There is a rule of thumb that you'll read about, like, oh, keep it within 88% or 90% of your valve is, like, a rule. So anytime you, like, whether it was a 4-valve motorcycle head or a complete, like, Chevy, Dodge, like, even a Lamborghini that's OHV, that's kind of like the rule, or maybe that works for OHC as well, I guess, but obviously that's a little different because you have more surface area. So at least as far as I've read about it for a 2-valve head, my kind of thinking about, like, how much do you go, like, when it comes to miking it out so you can clone it and saying, like, okay, and heads are different, like, you get into trouble, they're not all going to have identical, you know, water jacket wall thicknesses and stuff. You can get, like, the sonic tool to do that, but again, this is, like, a regular person doing this with some tools you can pick up, right? like I said, the most fancy thing I have is this anemometer and pitot tube, and it's really just for shits and giggles. It's not really beneficial to doing the job. Like, it's fun to look at where velocity changes once you cut something, because obviously it's going to slow down being at the same static speed. But my thinking was, and again, I could be like completely off on this and someone could laugh at me, but I have my washer. This is a perfect, I love having this for a video like this because this is a 1/8 inch washer, also known as 125,000 inches. And a lot of the cuts going on, at least in my heads, are around 100,000 inches or more. So like the floor, the short side radius, and looking at cross sections and kind of trying to scale them up and get a figure of, you know, how close the water jackets are, is like, that is kind of a good rule of thumb. The other reason is, like, do we have an exhaust valve? Yes, we do. And it's not going to go in all the way. Let's see here. Just do a little... How about lift like that? How would the overlap be with that? Smacking into the piston. I have seen that actually on the 351. The first engine I helped build when I was like 16 or 17, and it's the first time I did a valve job, but it was for a 351 with the valve actually went into the piston, and they were debating over who was going to keep the piston because the valve was literally, it was like this, like just melted in and notched into it. It was pretty cool. Pretty cool piece of catastrophic failure. But anyway, so here's a rule of thinking, is like, you could do the math on this by getting like how many cubic inches it would be. Like, let's say you didn't have, like I do, like I kind of am on the coattails of professionals. Hopefully I've given them honorable mentions, but mostly like Charles Servetio and David Vizard, because they're educational people. Like, they're kind of teachers and mentors, and they still maintain a business, and I'm not trying to like take that away from any of them. I also have the opinion that an E7 information should be free, because it's compared to horsepower and stuff of the day. Like, people will kind of snicker, even though I've been digging through 15 years of threads to find all of the secrets and any measurements, and really just seeing what people have like gotten out of them. And there was one guy that chimed in. I mean, we're talking like, there's Fox body Mustangs, naturally aspirated, that have cut into the 11s. One guy was making like 376 to the rear wheels. I mean, I don't know if that was with a T5, or probably not an AOD. AOD drivetrain loss, like at least unmodified, is pretty absurd, but say that was a T5 at 15%, that's like 430 horsepower or more. Like, that's insane. Out of E7s, and it was a 302, so it's not like, oh, I have a 347 with E7s or 351. Like, that's a 302, 5-liter, making well over 400 horsepower on the E7s. So, but I still won't find, like, certain things like, oh yeah, you want to go here and here. Like, I think, like, Steve Villacco had a DVD, and there's a couple clips of his work on YouTube, and he used to do work for Saline. Like, he did like hundreds and hundreds of heads. I don't know if he had the best numbers or how thin he would get, like how streetable it was, but you can't, like, I've even emailed him because I wanted more of something that was absolute instead of kind of more organic and stuff. So let's say you didn't have that, no matter how much you dug, is when you think of your valve lift, like, what is an HO cam anyway? It's only like a 430 thousandths, right? Which is basically like that, right? But yeah, I want to say it's the low 400s. I don't even think it's mid 400s. And then a truck cam, like the one out of my van, is in the 300s. Really teeny. But my point being is when you like, I started this whole build with my Lunati cam. So every decision I've made, and again, to roughly summarize it's basically a 3/4 cam. Like, people stopped using that term, but I think it's kind of the perfect term to accurately put, like B3s, EO3s, that's like a 3/4 cam, even though that's a single pattern. Instead of like my Lunati dual pattern, which I think will definitely push more power, but and definitely more low end. But my point is let's say you're running stock valves, you have the stock dimensions, you know that opening the heads themselves will be, I don't know, with a stock cam, like, okay, maybe you'll pick up 30 or 40 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot. You change the intake, and cam is now you're talking almost 100 horsepower. The thing is once you're looking at your cam specs, like, for example, if you went from a 400,000 to a 500,000th lift, is start thinking about where that 100,000ths, or excuse me, like where that should be. Sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought. Is where that should be applied into the bowl or the port, right? So same surface area, now it's gaining that much more air in a split second, pulsing that through. And then there's could be a formula worked out for it, but then you would consider, how much should I take out? Now, I have done the math on the 88%, and I learned that would be about, like, on any valve, for these kind of heads, like within that, let's say, 1.5 inch range or so, it's about 200 thousandths. So not necessarily all on one side, but the overall 88% would be about 200 thousandths. So then you would take your inside caliper, say, okay, I got 100 thousandths. At the same time, in the exhaust, because of where that goes, is that may want to come out 150 thousandths. Now you might want to check like how thin that gets, but that's just something to think about, is do the math with your cam, right? Like, you definitely wouldn't want to take out more than 200 thousandths. But it's something to just keep in mind that your cam, on average, when people go from stock to 3/4, is opening that much more. So that pocket or that sheet of air, and then that comes out of there. So now your cam, or your head rather, has made room for what your cam is doing with your valve events and geometry, whatever. But it's just something to think about. There is, like, I wouldn't call it like guesswork. Like, you can kind of be like, there's some people that probably have done like really moronic things or open things up crazy, and you just have to stop, think about like, okay, what's my cam spec? What's the 90% value or 88%? Subtract it, and then you'll know overall. But again, like in a spot like this, that's a little different. Like, it's not going to be totally equalized, but it's just something to consider when thinking about the dynamics. And that's all for my tape is out.